Hi, everyone, and welcome to State of State. This podcast is presented by betonline.ag, your number one source for all your sports info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest player reports for this year's NBA playoffs. BetOnline is always your sports information headquarters. We have you covered for all your sports wagering needs, whether it's the NBA, Major League Baseball, the NHL, right to UFC and boxing. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info, including live betting options, plus your favorite casino and card games that you can play right from your home. Head to betonline.ag today to use your mobile device to get in on the action. Be sure to use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. State of State is presented by BetOnline, where the game starts. Also, State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. So last week, we dove into what the defense is capable of in 2023. This week, it's all about the Nittany Lion offense for the 2023 season. We are going to go position by position, and especially the big news of the transfer from Penn State wide receiver Dante Cephas arriving on campus earlier this week. This past weekend, Justin has some in-depth detail, having had a hand in recruiting Dante Cephas at one point. So we're going to get to that in just a moment, but we are going to touch on something that has ruffled a lot of feathers. It's the whiteout game for 2023. Justin, this news came out a few days ago and it ticked off a lot of people. For those that don't know, the annual whiteout game, which only comes around once a year, this year is slated for the September 23rd home game against the Iowa Hawkeyes. Now, this infuriated a lot of Penn State football fans because I think everybody was circling the calendar, the biggest regular season game of the year being November 11th, hosting the Michigan Wolverines. That is instead a stripe out. Now, for those that don't know, these decisions in regards to day game, night game, when the kickoff is going to happen, largely are left up to the television networks. This looks like, to me, Fox looking at the schedule. And as you get later and later in the year, it is plausible to think that both Penn State and Michigan will be undefeated by the time November 11th comes around. Anything can happen. Who knows how the schedule is going to play out? However, Fox has made it very, very clear over the last few years with the big noon kickoff that their number one primetime game is going to be played at noon. It makes a ton of sense. It's something that ESPN College Game Day hasn't always done, and that you have this huge audience and then you roll right into the game. ESPN doesn't necessarily do that. They often bump their biggest game until the evening, and they keep guys like Kirk Herbstreit and Lee Corso and all those people on site so that they can cover the game in the evening. To me, this reeks of, well, Penn State really had maybe two plausible options for a night game, Justin. Either to open the season against West Virginia, which they're getting, by the way, but it's also a part of NBC's new coverage of the Big Ten. And now you've got the whiteout being declared for Iowa, an in-conference opponent. How did you feel about this news when it broke?
To be honest with you, I actually liked it, right? I think every time we go up to what's the name of their stadium up there in Iowa? Kinnick Stadium, I feel like it's a night game. They have the big whatever blackout or whatever theme they have going on. So I think it's nice for them to come into Penn State and witness a whiteout, especially coming from that section of the Big Ten coming over and playing at that point in the year, because I think it's still be a big game. I mean, Iowa always brings in good fans. So it's disappointing that Michigan's not that game, but at the same time, if they're looking at it to be undefeated, it makes logical sense for why that wouldn't be the night game.
It's tough to remove fanhood from the equation because you want the biggest possible atmosphere. There are people like the aforementioned Kirk Herbstreit who've called the whiteout the greatest environment in college football and maybe one of the greatest environments in professional sports, or in sports altogether. Not professional, but you know what I'm saying. It's basically professional. Let's not kid ourselves.
I would say the whiteout. I would say the whiteout is probably a different level of fandom than most NFL games until you get into the playoffs or Super Bowl or some Monday Night Football games. But 110,000 packed uniform color. It's pretty different.
It's special. It's special. And I think the average fan, again, looks at this and thinks, well, why can't they just make it a night game? And it's for all the reasons that I just told you, because these networks dive in and they essentially pick which game of the week they want. And then you go down the order in terms of priority: Fox, NBC, CBS, ESPN, Big Ten Network. And there's that trickle down effect. So Fox gets first dibs, so on and so forth. And that order might be slightly different, but Fox obviously is the primary home for the Big Ten. So this is disappointing. I agree. I would have loved to have seen this game against Michigan at night in a whiteout. And I keep coming back to, we've talked about it here on the show, Shea Patterson in the shotgun for Penn State, for Michigan, in a whiteout, first play from scrimmage, couldn't even get the snap off, had to call a timeout. Like, it's an electric atmosphere, and it could have potentially been an extra boost to Penn State going into a game that it's 50-50. You don't know if Penn State's going to win that game. So it does make that a little bit more challenging.
I agree. I will push back on just the sense that we never played night games at Michigan. Right. So just like leveling up to it, like, all right, we'll play you guys at noon. You come in, we'll kick your butt at noon, and we'll make Iowa, who he always makes us a big game up there, beat them up a little bit at our whiteout game. But at the same time, I think this is a different season, right? We got 2 primetime games in the first, 4 weeks?
Yeah.
We talk about setting the stage. I mean, I think that's how it's supposed to go, these type of seasons.
And like I said, it's plausible that Penn State is undefeated at that point. And plausible is a really strong word, because on October 21st, you go to Ohio State. And I don't want to discredit the rest of the Big Ten, but obviously there are 3 teams that everybody's talking about going into 2023: Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State within the Big Ten. So if you somehow were to go to the Horseshoe and beat Ohio State, not only would that be a huge resume builder going into the back end of the season, and hell, even if you lost to Michigan, that victory in itself could really help your case for the college football playoff. But that word that I said, plausibly undefeated, it's like, I'm stretching a bit, and I understand that. And I just want Penn State fans to have the appropriate expectations going into this Michigan game, because I think the expectations couldn't be any higher at this point, Justin. It's crazy.
I mean, that's true. I mean, expectations are up there, but they probably should be at this point.
I agree. So let's get to the roster news from this past weekend. We have been talking about this for a while. Former Kent State wide receiver Dante Cephas finally arriving on campus, started classes on Monday. Dante Cephas was finishing up his studies at Kent State, was graduating. So he had to complete all those things and finally made it to State College, and is going to begin to get acclimated into the program, as will a number of other commits and recruits as part of the class of 2023 in the coming weeks and months as we get ready for August camp. You have intimate knowledge of what Dante Cephas is all about as an athlete. Terry Smith had a big part in recruiting him. Obviously, you and Terry Smith are extremely close, but you actually know what it's like recruiting this player. So what was your initial evaluation of Dante Cephas? I assume this was when he was in high school.
He was in high school, from Penn Hills High School. Extreme athlete, right? One of the guys who are just overall athlete when you think of extreme jumping ability, high pointing the ball, just playmaking ability from that standpoint. Nice size, right? 6'2". He was more a slender build, but his athleticism was the thing that jumped off. The one thing he had in high school was he was a little speed deficient. But at the end of the day, his playmaking ability was undeniable. Like when he came to camp, wherever you watch, turn on the film, the ball's up, he was going to go get it. If you watch his basketball tape, he can dunk it any type of way that you want. And he had good short area quickness, and he had a nice competitive edge to him, a disposition on how he played. So it's really encouraging to see like him go to Kent State, ball out those couple years, and transfer to Penn State. Because I mean, just from the whole process, dealing with high school athletes, college athletes, just that the time in college sports where you can continue to develop, right? And like you can get to like a point where you're a valuable asset and can hit a free agency market. And now Dante Cephas gets to bring his brand and himself into the Penn State ecosystem and be a needed part to a very explosive offense that we'll continue to talk about and really make an imprint for himself in his future. And for the team.
True. Oh, true. Why do you think Dante Cephas wound up at a MAC level school?
I would say when we think about the economics of speed, right, and football and how it comes out where people get slotted, a lot of times in just college D1 in general, Power Five, Group of Five, MAC, or whatever, you can probably base it down to the majority of players hitting some size and speed standards, right? Everybody in Power Five is the right size, speed, athleticism, checking all the boxes. Group of Five, you miss a couple. Mac, it's a couple more, but there's a sliding scale. Obviously, in today's day and age, it's a little bit more fluid because NIL opportunities, you get a little bit different recruiting. But at the time when he was coming out, I think he didn't have a strong 40-yard dash, which a lot of times as personnel departments, we underwrite your level of ability or where you can go or how high you can perform at that level. So it shows that he continued to get better. I mean, you look on his film, he doesn't look whatever his time was in high school, but continue to get better and move along. And at the same time, when we think about personnel, it's not always about your like if you're good enough to be somewhere. It's about a fit as well. Like, yeah, I think he was coming in around the same time, you know, Jahan Dotson's were like around, or like just like what's on the team and what's needed at the same time, right? And the numbers on the receiving on the recruiting roster and those good things. So happy to see him coming up in state though.
As I mentioned, you are related to Terry Smith, so he has been integral in bringing Dante along and making sure that this transfer happened. Also, there's some familiarity for Dante Cephas in high school. He played with Daquan Hardy. He played with your cousin, an active Penn State running back, Tank Smith. How much do you think that familiarity helped this all happen?
I think it's a pretty strong happenstance, right? Like when you have teammates that you won a state championship with on a team that are having success. One is a walk-on, one is a starting nickel back on the team. I mean, it speaks volumes. I mean, especially when you look at the need at Penn State, the needs that Penn State has, which is a receiver, and what they have in terms of weapons around them from the running backs, the offensive line, top quarterback. It's a nice little plug and play type of situation to come in and play in your home state. I mean, closer to home as well.
And you talk about plug and play. I don't know if you would call it an expectation, maybe hope that he could come in and be wide receiver number one. Do you think that's plausible? I've used that word a lot in this show, but it's appropriate.
I mean, this is big time football, right? Like in the day of NIL and transfer portal, like I think he's expected to come in here and be receiver one, or at least I'd say receiver one. Like I'm going to say that. I don't know if the staff puts that on him, but I think for him to come here, that's where he's expected to be. Based on his film, he put up some pretty crazy numbers and stats. And like I say, when people have a feeling of making plays, they make plays all over.
In 2021, Cephas, 82 catches, 1,240 yards receiving, and 9 touchdowns. Was banged up a little in 2022, 48 catches, 744 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He can be obviously extremely productive in Penn State. Since Jahan Dotson, since KJ Hamler, hasn't had somebody who really catches passes and produces at that volume. So is that going to be able to translate to the Big Ten level? We're going to have to find out. This feels very similar to the Mitchell Tinsley experiment that went down last year. But in my opinion, just kind of looking at the way Tinsley played out, and I don't think he was bad. I think I think Tinsley is more of a possession receiver. So I think they're just two very different athletes. Tinsley did very well in the Penn State system, and he helped where he needed to help. I think the expectations are higher for Cephas. Do you think he can outdo what the Tinsley transfer was?
I hope he can, to be honest. And based on what we need, I think to take that next step, having a deep threat to get get one of those guys out of the box, to let Nick and Katron do their thing, right? And with Drew stepping in, having some flexibility and balance in the offense approach, I think a number one receiver or a go-to guy that'll make you pay in one-on-one matchups is definitely needed.
And you look at the rest of the receiving core, the incumbent number one, expected number one, is Keandre Lambert-Smith. Now, we've talked about him a lot, that he's got to step up. This is the make or break season for him. Really, Dante Cephas coming in and adding a lot of competition to those top 3 wide receiver positions. Trey Wallace is somebody that has been talked about as potentially the number 2 wide receiver, maybe the number 3. Amari Evans made a hell of a case for himself during spring ball and especially the blue-white game. You also think about Malik McClain, Caden Saunders, Liam Clifford. There are just so many guys that you can throw into the mix here. Now that you kind of have a picture of what this receiving core is going to look like, and we're really not going to fully comprehend it maybe until the end of September, and we'll get a better feel for it as training camp comes along in August. But on paper, who do you see doing what role within this wide receiver core?
I mean, it's hard to break it down when you go from the top receiver to how they rotate them in. But I would definitely say Keandre and Dante Cephas, I think, are the definite 1 and 2s. And I think we have to tie in the tight ends into that. When you talk about passing targets, that's how my mind works in the sense of like who are the targets, right?
Sure.
Those 2. And then I would think of the tight end being the next biggest threat when it comes from that standpoint. But the other receivers, I think they have to kind of shuffle that out through the preseason, to be completely honest.
Yeah, there's a lot that's still to be discovered. And listen, is Keandre Lambert-Smith maybe a really, really good slot wide receiver? That's entirely possible. Is that Dante Cephas's role? I don't know. He could be more of a split end type, a boundary wide receiver. He's about 6'1". You have Malik McClain, who looks like has good bursts, has good size, good athleticism, but could be more of the big possession receiver that they look to develop as the years go by. He's got multiple years of eligibility. Cephas is the guy this is his last go. He's got one last shot to really make an impression. Could have gone to the NFL this past year. It would have been entirely possible. The injuries in 2022, obviously something to consider, but getting this opportunity at Penn State is huge. And especially for all the reasons we keep talking about in terms of Big Ten title aspirations, college football playoff, national title aspirations. This seems like a really good situation. And now, as you kind of just said, expanding things. The passing game begins and ends with the first-year starter, Drew Allar, at quarterback. As we're looking at this offense, I don't necessarily think going into this year you have to point the finger at Drew Allar for whether or not it succeeds or fails. There's a lot he still has to learn, and this will be a learning season for him. Right. However, this passing game is going to be completely reliant on whether or not he is going to mature quickly enough. Does he pick up where Sean Clifford left off? And I know a lot of people might scoff at that, but from the neck up, Sean Clifford was still a very, very solid quarterback at the Big Ten level. Drew Allar has more physical gifts, but is he going to step in appropriately? Now that this is all kind of falling in place for young Drew Allar, how do you think he's feeling going into 2023? Are you a fan of rivalries? Are you a fan of smack talk? Do you like to stand out from the crowd at tailgates? If so, check out Smack Apparel and see what their team has geared up for football season. Their Let There Be White tee is the perfect gear for all those famous whiteout games at Beaver Stadium. Or get straight to the point with the worst tee for all the Ohio State haters out there. Smack Apparel has the must-have tees for all your teams, including pro and college football, plus basketball, baseball. Every fan is covered. Head over to smackapparel.com and use the promo code STATE10, that's STATE10 at checkout for 10% off. Again, that's smackapparel.com, promo code STATE10 at checkout. Why wear boring when you can wear Smack? Are you looking for undeniably good hair and beard care? Then Maestro's Classic is perfect for you. Maestro's has beard washes, beard oils, beard butters, plus hair gels and pomades. It's one brand for every man. Visit maestrosclassic.com. That's MAESTROS classic.com and use our promo code STATE20. That's STATE20 at checkout for 20% off your order. Maestro's Classic, crafting a better you.
You have to feel confident, I think, in the sense of seeing them prepare often on social media, whether it's always working out, but feel confident with the running backs that he has behind him, tight end and the offensive line to be protected, and playing it with a defense on the other side that can kind of limit the opposing offenses. I think he should feel good. I mean, he seems to be a guy, like when you're coming as that number one guy, you're typically touted with high expectations for a long time. So I think he's probably just licking his chops to get in there and make something happen.
Granted, we saw a little bit of Allar last season, Justin, but from what you have seen of him, what do you like? What do you not like?
Man, I think you like his awareness, right? You just see things of working through the progression on the backside, dig in the spring game, and it was a natural feel. It didn't look like he was, going through like a drill or anything. It was like, oh, I do this, boom, and just he has arm talent. Arm talent gets you a lot of places, and he seems to be pretty poised. And one thing that surprises me a lot about him is his mobility in the pocket. Obviously, not from a 40-yard stance, but awareness and just quick feet and just footwork in general. I thought is pretty impressive for a young quarterback, especially since we run the read option. There is a level of threat to being able to move a little bit. I thought there wasn't one at all, but seeing him move, I'm like, okay, you can cause some DNs to bite a little bit. So seeing that is impressive and encouraging.
Yeah, it's certainly not a Caleb Williams situation where you're going to run quarterback draw, but you got to be able to do enough.
No, different size guy. I mean, Drew Allar's a big quarterback, and when you look at the opposing quarterbacks or just the makeup of the different quarterbacks, you got the Caleb Williams, the Bryce Youngs, right, the smaller type of stature, or even just a 6-foot quarterback. He's your old style, pro style quarterback that has some nifty feet. So I'm excited to watch him play.
Or at the very least, just line up under center and fall forward on a QB sneak because he's big
Well,
enough.
Those two guys, the Long Boys, and the Long Boys package to handle
I hope they can handle all that. Keeping it at quarterback, Bo Prabula, a lot of positive things have been spoken about him since he arrived on campus for winter workouts in early 2022. So this is a guy that is not exactly sitting there, waiting for Drew Allar to be the starter. He's competing and he continues to put in the work. So it sounds like there's a lot of excitement around what he can be, whether or not that's at Penn State or somewhere else. What do you expect the package to look like for Bo Prabula? Because two very different athletes, Prabula and Allar.
I think James has always done historically a good job of mixing in different packages with quarterbacks, right? Whether it was Tommy Campbell with Trace or anybody with Sean, and like just how everything is kind of matriculated throughout the years. I think you building his packages around the red zone, that fringe area, keeping offenses or defenses honest, and and go from there. I mean, the offensive coordinator has a background in running those type of plays with running style quarterbacks, and I think you can open up and spread out and give a different look in different packages with him coming in the game, especially in the red zone to look out for.
In regards to the running backs that you were just touching on, the Lawn Boys, Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, everybody expects them to pick up where they left off. What's the possibility like for both these guys this year?
I mean, they both ran with a lot of confidence. I say that about running backs because sometimes it looks like they're just hitting the hole and running, but like they both run with like a lot of patience and vision, right? Like especially Katron Allen, I think he's somebody that's we all knew about Nick Singleton coming into the Penn State as being a number one guy, and he lived up to the billing, home run threat. But I don't think sometimes Katron Allen gets enough respect that he deserves in terms of like the skill set that he has from a running back standpoint, just his 0 to 5 ability, being able to run, get sneaky 4 to 6 yard carries on a consistent basis. And the way that he, like from a defensive perspective, like the way that he challenges and punishes defenders on early runs, that's a mentality that was lacking at one point, I think, in the run attack for the offense at Penn State. And it brings a level of toughness to be able to split those runs with Nick Singleton and things of that nature. So I think looking at those two backs, I would really like to see Katron Allen continue to step his game to the sense of whether it's explosive plays, but continue to see what he's doing, and Nick Singleton keep trucking in the way he has been.
You talk about that, physicality in the running game, that thumper, so to speak. It's so fascinating because this week it was announced Kayvon Lee has completed his transfer. He went to the portal in January. He's going to Mississippi State in the SEC. I'm not even remotely comparing the ability of Singleton and Allen to Kayvon Lee. However, you look at what Kayvon Lee could have been in terms of his size. Definitely does not have the same burst or speed as Singleton and Allen, but you're getting that element of what old school Penn State Big Ten running program looked like at one point. I think of the Tony Hunts of the world, the Evan Roysters of the world. You have that element, but then you've got this pop, this explosion that has been missing since Saquon, since Miles Sanders. It's just really exciting. And my thing is, Justin, how much do these two get involved in the passing game in 2023? Because they dabbled, but it wasn't a huge part for them.
That's the real upgrade that you would want to see from, I guess, if there was something to Nick Singleton's game, is just catching the ball out of the backfield, right? Whether it's splitting out a little bit, having some of those different attacks like we saw in Saquon late in his later years, right? And even for Miles, like how he was used in Philadelphia from like that scat back type of position, and being able to use them in the game at the same time. Those type of that progression, whether it's like the was it like the triple wing T that they kind of run with everybody.
Yeah,
I think it can get pretty interesting when you think of protecting a first year starting quarterback, right? Like, so when it comes down to them getting into the passing game, I think it's essential. But especially when you talk, like, to rewind a little bit about Lee going to Mississippi, there's something about that force when you're having that power and speed and attacking a defender. Because I agree, he was a powerful runner, but there's something to the speed, the power, that when I say a mature runner, like Catron Allen and Nick Singleton, that's like an art to speeding up, speed to power, boom, or making somebody miss and taking off. So like the fact that they have that combination, them two together, creates a weird dynamic for a defense, especially when you start pounding it down in 4-minute offenses that close out games. Like, so that's, I mean, because football is a physical sport. Like, we always remember, I know we get happy about the passing and interceptions, but it comes down to that physicality in the middle of the game.
And we get happy about the numbers. We always get happy about the statistics, and people are hoping for video game type numbers from Drew Allar. I think it's a reasonable projection looking at Singleton and Allen that you have 2,000-yard backs this year.
That's what I would like to see. I'd like to see that. Both of them having about 300-400 yards receiving. Because you get the ball to them out of the backfield.
It's entirely possible. Now, again, you look at what they did last year. I don't believe, I think Nick cracked 1,000 yards in scrimmage yards altogether. Catron did not, but he came damn near close. But you don't look on that season and be like, he didn't break 1,000 yards rushing. Not a good season. No, it was a great first season for those two guys. And the thing I love, Justin, is that it was the hot hand. There were games where Catron was all over the map. I think about the Auburn game. Catron really dominated in that game, and other situations where it was the Nick Singleton show. These guys appear to play selfless football, and that's really, really difficult to do, as you were mentioning, in this era of the transfer portal and NIL. These two seem to be a team in the backfield.
Absolutely.
And that all comes back to the least sexy part of the offense to talk about, and that's the offensive line. And then here's the thing. This offensive line looks like it's going to be in very good shape going into this season. There are some injury concerns, but it sounds like by the time the season rolls around, they should be in good shape. Guys like Landon Tengwall, you expect to be a full go once the season comes around. Olu Fashanu at left tackle, I expect to pick up right where he left off. I think there's some questions about the competition at right tackle, Caden Wallace and Drew Shelton. And obviously Hunter Norzad, the former transfer from Cornell, has looked really good. There's some competition at right guard as well. To me, Justin, this offensive line seems like they're going to be better than they were last year and deeper than they were last year. How do you feel about it?
I would agree. I mean, the brick squad, I think we look across the whole line. I mean, like you said, from Olu coming back, and I mean, we talk about the right tackle with Wallace, but I think there's a lot of depth there too. When you think of, like you said, Langdon Tangwell and those guys coming and having an impact. This is one of the better offensive lines that we've seen at Penn State, I would say. So,
yeah, it's all trending in the right direction. And I don't want to leave out the tight ends. I know we touched on them a little bit, but honestly, this whole situation at tight end just seems to get better and better. I've talked about it a lot. The number 3 tight end in the 2023 class, Andrew Rapplier, is on his way. So, I mean, you're just going to add him to this tight end room that is just filthy. Like, I don't even know how to really put it into words. With Theo Johnson, Tyler Warren, Khalil Dinkins had himself a really good spring. I hope to see a lot of him. Mega Barnwell is maybe the biggest tight end that ever lived, and that's not accurate, but you know what I mean. He's just been fantastic. And also Joey Schlaffer. I mean, it's just an embarrassment of riches. And when you just look at all this talent, Justin, you know, we keep gushing over the possibility of this team on both sides of the ball. How difficult is it as a player, and you've lived this, to compartmentalize that hype?
It's interesting, right? Because I think there's a nice balance of letting the hype in. Like there's something of I guess a competitor knowing that there's a big fight coming up or there's expectation. Um, and if people are expecting, there's something about that level of confidence, but I don't get that from the team. It seems like when being around the team, it seems like a confident, well-grounded squad, especially for it to be a younger team as well. So it seems like they're pretty hungry trying to figure out what's going on, and they know they're talented and they have expectations of making the playoffs. So like when you have that, like then you get up to like, you know, first world problems. Like, all right, now the problems are keeping the noise down, right? Like you hear Alabama, like Nick Saban's always talking about the rat poison, just positive stuff happening. But like that is what comes with, I guess, championship runs. So I would say that they're dealing with it from a standpoint because they, I think, are expecting it.
And James Franklin is not one to hear guys consistently talking about Big Ten title, college football playoff, national title. Like he's been on the record during spring ball that it's like, I'm glad guys are thinking that way, but I'm going to go tell them to shut their mouth because it's one day at a time, the 1-0 mentality, regardless of what people, you know, some people might like that. Some people don't, I don't know. But I personally think this absolutely has to be a team that takes it one day at a time, or else you're dead in the water. And all the reasons that I said opening this show with the way the schedule could play out, it's great to be excited about certain, you know, dates on the calendar, but you got to get through those other ones first.
Absolutely. The 1-0 mentality is strong. It's the culture up there, right? That's why I say like that continuous development. So like having that aspect, you have goals and aspirations, but that 1-0 mentality is the engine that drives it.
We continue to be optimistic and hopeful. I know there's Penn State fans out there that are watching and listening to this that are like, this makes you feel uncomfortable to feel this positive about the team.
Okay.
God knows, I know it's okay. It's all right. Just embrace it, everybody. It's been almost 40 years since this team won a national championship. There's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of reasons to be positive. Dante Cephas coming into town. I know people got a little bent out of shape about the whiteout game, but guys, everything's going to be fine. Just hang on. We're going to be all right. Thank you for joining us this week on State of State. Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, and wherever else you get your podcasts. And of course, let us know what you think of the show on Twitter @TheKing1 and @TomHannafin. State of State is presented by Bet Online.